Good morning everyone from NA, good afternoon everyone from EU, and I guess good evening to everyone living in Asia. I am back after a couple of days of missing because I was held by the barber as I was getting my hair cut, so I was making the last few videos from the seat at the barber shop. I couldn't have my face in the videos, but now we can. Now we can, and it's a good time, that I come back on the screen because this is a pretty important piece of news that will center around one of the major features of Dragonflight being Mythic Plus, which is the Affix. Now, if you're still not too familiar with the Affix, Thundering is an Affix which will periodically happen every 75-ish seconds in the key. It will shower the place you're at with a bunch of circles that you have to dodge, otherwise you get stunned, and then all players in the party will get marked by an orb on their head. It's either going to be 3 white orbs on 3 players and 2 blue orbs on 2 players, or 3 blue orbs and 2 white orbs. You have to pair yourself with the opposite orb until there is only 1 orb left. The player with the orb left is going to just let it expire and nothing will happen. If 2 players are left, 2 or more players are left with the orbs still on their head, they will get stunned for 4 seconds and take a whole bunch of damage, possibly lethal damage. Now, where is the benefit of this seemingly annoying affix is that the orbs on your head last for 15 seconds and you do 15% more damage and healing when you have the orbs on your head. So, the entire playstyle is around trying to hold. You're essentially playing chicken. You're trying to hold as long as possible before pairing yourself with the other person with the opposite mark on their head, because you want to keep this 15% damage buff for as long as possible before clearing it with the other person with the opposite orb. That's the idea of the affix. Now, where the massive change for today is the fact that now the damage increase and the healing increase goes from 15% to 30%. So now you're going to be getting a 30% damage boost for 15 seconds whenever you get this orb on your head. Now it's going to be even more important. Now this is going to be essentially a mandatory thing whenever you get into Mythic Plus and you start doing semi-challenging keys, to properly hold onto this mark on your head for as long as possible. If it's you with the white mark and Bob with the blue mark, you don't want to get next to each other immediately and clear the debuff immediately. You want to keep this 30% damage buff for as long as you can because it's very, very powerful. Now, there are some problems with this damage buff. Problem number 1 is that currently, and pretty much since Mythic Plus was invented, the strongest specs in Mythic Plus are the specs with the strongest burst. They are the specs that can have very powerful cooldowns, that can line up very well for the biggest and most dangerous trash packs, put all together and AoE'd all down. That's when the big cooldowns come into play. I'm sure you are familiar with things like Celestial Alignment, or things like Combustion, or things like Avenging Wrath, and a series of other big cooldowns for many of the specs. So this means that this affix is essentially going to make the strong specs even stronger. It's going to make the rich get richer. All of the specs that are good because they have consistent damage are not really benefiting too much from this affix. You know, you have specs that do 7 out of 10 damage at all times. And then you have specs that do 4 out of 10 damage, and then they do spikes of 10 out of 10 damage, and then back to 4 out of 10. And then their cooldowns are back, and they are back at doing 10 out of 10 damage. So the spec that does 7 out of 10 damage doesn't really benefit too much from a 30% damage boost because they don't have the cooldowns to support this damage buff. Specs like Elemental Shaman are notorious for not having too strong or too big of a set of cooldowns. Even specs like Arms and Fury Warrior don't really have particularly strong, big cooldowns. Even Feral Druid, although in Dragonflight they are getting a little bit better, has always been known for not really having very powerful cooldowns. Even the Subtlety Rogue is a very consistent spec without too much burst damage. So these type of specs don't gain nearly as much as a spec like Fire Mage with their Combustion, or Frost Death Knight with Breath of Sindragosa and a handful of other cooldowns they can use. So it's kind of sad because you kind of wanted to see different specs become powerful in Mythic Plus, and with this affix giving a much stronger boost to specs that are strong with burst cooldowns, it is looking like it's going to make some of the specs we have seen before be popular in Mythic Plus continue to be popular because of the way that the affix will work in this first season of Dragonflight. Now, where is the caveat? Is Mythic Plus just being made easier? You know, is Blizzard just simply giving us more damage with no drawback whatsoever? The drawback is that all of the mobs in the Mythic Plus keys will get 5% more HP now. So this makes it overall, if we want to be technical, an actual nerf. Eventually, you will reach key levels where the increase in HP of the mobs will be more health you have to churn through compared to the increased damage you're doing because this buff is now bigger. So technically, this is even kind of a nerf, really, to our power. But of course, most players won't really notice it and won't really feel it because they will be too busy drooling after the 30% damage buff boost. That is going to make them feel good and give them some dopamine release in their brain. So that's what's going to make them feel good. For the specs, of course, who can make good use of this affix. Now, talking about specs that can make good use of this affix, the sort of a bad point about this affix is that you are going to be completely dependent on playing around the affix rather than implementing the affix in your run strategy. You are going to be on a leash, basically. If you look at previous affixes like Prideful, like Tormented, like Encrypted, they were tied to mini-bosses, to mobs inside of other trash packs. They were tied to a percentage of the trash count. So you, the player, and you, the team in Mythic Plus, had the agency to choose when and where to make use and to benefit from this affix. You know, when do you want to do the mini-boss? When do you want to do the mini-bosses of Tormented? In which order, and which of the ones you even want to skip if you want to, for example. Same goes for Encrypted. Which of the relics are we going to take and when? It was still up in your court to decide what to do with the affix. With Thundering, despite being a massive 30% damage buff, you won't really have the agency, because this affix is going to be spawning every minute, whether you like it or not. There is not really going to be any agency on your part in when to benefit from this affix. Of course, this will mean that you have to start playing around the affix. For example, you have to start timing certain pulls to try to make them happen as you get this affix. It would feel horrible, for example, to get a Thundering affix and a 30% damage boost as you are finishing the last few mobs of a trash pack, and then you have to start running and start pulling the next trash pack and effectively waste 10 seconds out of the 15 seconds of the duration of this buff. Or it might feel awful, for example, to have Thundering proc when the enemy tyrannical boss is at 15% HP. So the boss is already dead, you already used your cooldowns, you already used Bloodlust, and then you have to move on to run to the next trash pack. So this Thundering is wasted, right? That's the part that is kind of a feel bad moment, because even though the buff is massive, it's a 30% damage buff, which is arguably bigger than most of the affixes we've gotten before. It's not really up to you how good of a use you're gonna make of it. Yes, of course, top level, very good. Mythic Plus groups will be trying to maximize it as good as possible. They will alter their route to make sure that they can deal with the biggest packs, the biggest and most dangerous trash packs, while they have the affix happening at the same time, so they can benefit from the 30% damage buff, of course. But it will make it much harder to, I guess, organize in packs, for example. Trying to know how much damage your pug has, so you know which packs you have to take if you want to reach this very dangerous trash pack with the Thundering affix, is going to be very, very difficult to do properly in a pug compared to a very good high-level Mythic Plus pre-made group. So that's kind of the annoying part about the affix. Despite the fact that you're getting a massive damage boost now, it is still up to a fixed timer happening at fixed intervals that you simply have to just follow. Basically, to just be dragged around by this timer and try to match it, and try to match your cooldowns, match your own timers to the timers of the affix. That feels like perhaps not nearly as good as the previous affixes we have gotten in Shadowlands. And it can drag you around so much that, for example, it might even polarize which talents you take. Because now, once you know that this thundering affix happens every 60 seconds, then you are going to be taking every 60-second cooldown you can grab in your talent tree. You know, you have, oh, I have this 1 minute cooldown which gives me overall 6% more damage, or this passive effect which increases all of my damage by 9%. Yes, but the 1 minute cooldown, you can use it when you're doing 30% more damage every single time, which makes it just much better. So, you know, some players might not like playing like that, feeling like they are constantly running to chase this affix rather than having something deterministic like, hey, here are the mini bosses, here are what you have to defeat to gain which buff, go and make your route. This type of new affix is a little bit different, which might not be enjoyed by a part of the player base. To finish, I wanted to finish with a question mark about Blizzard's own philosophy, because this is what Blizzard debuted saying about the affix. Amongst many of the things they were talking about, when it came to borrowed power, the power-up you were gaining from the affixes, Blizzard themselves said, we hit a power level in Shadowlands that felt extreme and contributed heavily to the short-circuiting effect described above. So even they were able to acknowledge that the power buffs we were gaining in the affixes, in the power affixes of Shadowlands, were a bit too much. This was 20 days ago. So in 20 days, in just 20 days, their philosophy went from 0% damage buff on the affix because you have gotten too much already in Shadowlands to plus 30% damage buff for 15 seconds. That's how much and how fast they change in just 20 days, which I thought was quite interesting in knowing why the philosophy just drastically changed so much. If the complaining of the player base was enough to just make them give up and give in to the demands of the player base and give yet another massive power buff in Mythic Plus. We will see, however, as we continue beta testing, if this is going to be the final version of the affix. As we just see, 20 days is a lot of time for Blizzard to change massively something like an affix in Mythic Plus, so maybe before the release Blizzard will continue to change this affix even more. But for now, this is what we have for the testing available already in the beta of Dragonflight in this weekend of Mythic Plus testing. After this, it's time to leave, however. These were all of the big major news related to the Mythic Plus thundering affix for Dragonflight, so I'm going to leave you to your own thoughts about this affix. Personally, I don't think it's too good to once again give more power to burst specs in Mythic Plus. They already have an inherent advantage because of the way they do damage with, so giving them an affix to make them even stronger, I don't think is the way to go. We will see eventually if I will be right. As soon as we see the meta of Mythic Plus, we will see if this was correct or if it was a mistake. But for now, this is enough. We're going to leave each other and I'm going to leave you to the rest of your weekend. Thanks, of course, as usual, to all of my Patreon supporters for contributing and helping a lot myself and this channel to continue to provide you with WoW content. You can support in other ways that don't include spending money, like for example liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to this channel as well. That is also free, doesn't cost too much beyond just a couple of clicks, and that would help a lot. Lastly, for more social interactions and general parasocial relationships, you can follow me on Twitter, as well as subscribing to my Patreon right somewhere around, no, it's this, yeah, somewhere around here on those two links. Thank you guys again for watching, see you guys soon, and in the meantime, still, this is not good. Again, the sleeves are short, again, it's not cold, and we are almost over October, so you just have like 4 more days and then the excuses are finished.